All right. So hello everyone and welcome. My name is Lisa Kim and I'm from Futures Without Violence and hosting today's webinar titled Assembling the Pieces, Tools to Build an Effective Board. This is part of an ongoing webinar series that we've been having on organizational sustainability and is supported by the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women and part of a training institute that Futures hosts called Supporting Organizational Sustainability to Address Violence Against Women Institute, or SOS Institute for short. You will receive emails notifying you of additional webinars in the series. I think we have one more for this cycle, and the topic is social media and communication strategies, so please be on the lookout for that. Today's webinar will run for an hour and a half. During the webinar, your phone line will be muted. You may ask a question or report a technical issue using the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. If you wish to listen to the presentation over the phone rather than through your computer speakers, please dial 1-888-850-4523 and dial the participant code 755-365#. Once you have been connected, please dial *6 so that you can be muted during the call to minimize background noise. I want to point out a couple of the features that we will be using today. Closed captioning is provided in today's presentation. Captions will appear in the box on the bottom of your screen, and you have the ability to scroll up and down in this box. Please note that when you manually scroll through the text, the auto scroll will be disabled. To enable this feature, please click on the auto scroll box located on the upper right corner of the captioning box. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer section. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat box throughout the presentation. The chat box is again located on the right-hand side of your screen, and this is where we've been writing our names and our organizations and where we're tuning in from. We'll do our best to answer all questions by the end of the presentation. For technical support during the presentation, please send me a private chat. I'm here under the username Anissa Ali. By clicking the chat box drop-down menu on the upper right corner of the box and choosing the Start Chat with Hosts option. You can also call 1-800-422-3623 for Adobe Tech Support. At the end of the webinar, you will be prompted to answer a short survey. Please take a moment to give us feedback on today's presentation and also make suggestions for future topics. We want to be responsive to your needs. Also, as a reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be available afterwards, and a PDF version of the slides are available for download in the lower right-hand corner in the box titled Files To. As I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is part of a series that we're providing under the umbrella of the SOS Institute. The Institute was created in 2010 and offers an interactive 2.5-day training and ongoing technical assistance for OW grantees to enhance their organizational infrastructure. Participation for the Institute is built around teams of 3 to 4 individuals from the same organization, which may include the executive director, a board member, and program staff. We cover a broad range of topics from aligning your mission and core values to effective collaborations to staff development. We have an extraordinary team of people who are veterans in organizational sustainability, given that they have either founded, have led, or are leading various CVSV organizations. And we have one of our faculty members here with us today, Amy Sanchez. Amy is currently the CEO of Break the Cycle and has over 20 years of experience in the domestic violence movement, serving in various service roles. She previously served as an independent consultant and past CEO of National Latino Network and co-executive director of Casa de Esperanza, where she held a variety of leadership roles within the organization during the past 15 years. We also have with us Monica Arenas, Futures Senior Program Specialist, who has been managing the SOS Institute over the years. During the 15 years at the organization, 15 plus years at the organization, Monica has participated in the development and implementation of training programs and conferences on domestic violence, human trafficking, and organizational sustainability for programs working with underserved communities. And last but not least, we have with us Isabel Rubio, the Executive Director for the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama, or HICA, a nonprofit organization that integrates, educates, and connects Alabama's Hispanic individuals and families through its educational, leadership, community development, and advocacy work. Isabel is deeply involved in her community and serves on boards locally, regionally, and nationally. And she is also an SOS Institute alum, so we're very happy to invite her back in the house as a guest speaker. And given that our topic today is about board of directors, I wanted to note that all three of our speakers, in addition to their day jobs, are currently board members of the same organization. So they can relate to program staff, EDs, as well as board members. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Amy, who will start us off.
Thank you, Lisa. The funny thing that you said about us being board members of the same organization, that was kind of, we didn't plan that when we were planning the webinar, frankly. It was really about getting people who have had multiple hats and multiple roles, to work on the webinar together. So thank you for your introduction. It's an honor for me to be here with all of you today, and it's an honor to be co-presenting with Isabel and Monica. A couple of pieces that we wanted to say before we started. We want this time together to be informative for all of you who are on the webinar. And so please feel free to use the chat function like Lisa said to ask questions and whatnot, and we will do our best to get to answer the questions. We're anticipating, having quite a bit of time at the end, probably 15 minutes or so, to be able to answer questions. So keep those coming kind of throughout the presentation. The other thing that I wanted to say was that, again, in the spirit of being interactive, we really wanted to let you know that we're going to be, each of us are taking a lead on certain slides, but that we really wanted to be able to add our 2 cents kind of as we go. So I might be presenting a slide, and then Monica or Isabel will jump in with an example or a story or whatnot. So that's the framework that we wanted to use today, again, to have it be more interactive, and really, because you'll see very quickly, as I'm sure all of you know and have experience with, there are many different examples, tools, best practices, and stories that we can tell, and so wanting to provide a format that can tap into that rich environment of sharing. So I wanted to say that up front as well. We have 2 primary objectives for this webinar. The first is to really look at key strategies and best practices to build an effective board. And what we've tried to do, and you will see, is highlighting different components of board of directors development, engagement, and then keeping people engaged as they continue on in the board process, whether they be brand new board members or seasoned board members. And then that builds into the second goal or objective, which is to have some actionable steps or actionable strategies for retaining an effective board of directors. So before we get started, one thing that we thought would be really helpful for us as facilitators to know is for us to do quickly this poll. Lisa, if you could pull that up for us. And basically the poll is, what is your role at your organization? executive director, program staff, or board member. So if you could vote, we'll pause for about 20 seconds for you all to vote. Okay. So it looks like we have about nearly half of the people on the webinar are executive directors. And about a little over, almost nearly 25% are board members. So a good shout out to all of you who are board members on. I know that you're volunteers and taking the time during the day to participate on this webinar is really, really great. So thank you for that. So the way that we've broken down the webinar are really the 7 kind of concrete steps to success for having a successful board. And we'll go through each of these throughout the webinar. The first step is really assessment and kind of assessing where you're at. The second is getting ready to grow or deepen the engagement in the work of the board. So what are the things that you need to have in place, right, to make that big leap to doing things differently than the way that you've done them in the past? Obviously, some steps around recruitment of new board members, onboarding, and what we mean by onboarding is once you've recruited them and you've voted them onto the board, what are some things that you can do to bringing them onto the board in as smooth a transition as possible? The next step is building connections within the organization and externally. The sixth step is getting on the same page. So we'll be talking quite a bit there about communication and direction. And then the final step is really kind of a mixture of many different things, really best practices to how you then institutionalize the first 6 steps, institutionalize that into your organization, into the work, and into advancing your mission. So with that, I'll turn it over to Isabel for step 1.
Amy, thank you so much. And as Amy said, I'm just honored to be here with all of you and honored to share time with Monica and Amy and my other friends from Futures to be with you on this webinar. And to talk about how important it is to have the right board of directors who is helping you run your organization. When we think about what it means to choose board members and sort of get the right people around the table, this becomes a learning process. And, it's going to look different if you are just starting an organization as opposed to if you're an organization that's 10, 15, or 20 or 25 years old. More likely than not, if you are a new organization, you're probably going to have a lot of people around the table that are very, very passionate about the mission and might not know a whole lot about being on a board of directors. That was certainly my experience when I was starting my organization about 17 years ago. We all go through that as founders, and we all learn along the way that it takes a little bit more than passion. You need to have a good set of people around the table with lots of different skills that they bring. But passion is also very important too. You never want to lose sight of that. There are many, many tools that are available to us on the internet that sort of give you grids about the different kinds of skills that we need. You can find those. They're easily available to us. It's important to think about, we need people who can help us with our legal needs, our financial needs, the human resource needs that we might have, One of the things that my organization that we look at is because we are an organization that works with the immigrant Latino community, is we want to make sure that we are striving to have a board that is made up at least 51% of our board being Latino. Because we're located in the Deep South, that is still really something that we have a hard time making that mark. But we have written it into our bylaws because we think that it is that important. We also have in our bylaws, we try to be gender equal in terms of having equal male and female representation on our board. So there are lots of different ways that you can look at what is your board composition. We also try to make sure that our board generally represents our community. So when you think about tokenism, I mean, we have to be careful about that because we don't want people who just represent one certain minority group, but we do want people who can certainly come from various communities that bring that authentic voice. When we do work with specific communities that are directly tied with our mission, in our case, the Latino community, we also work with people who are survivors. You know, it's important. Are we going to have that voice? That's an important voice to have on the board. We also need to make sure that we are doing that in a way that is respectful, and we are training those people to also be members of a board, because you can put people in a situation that they oftentimes might not be ready for. The board of directors has the responsibility to help raise money, and so that is a very critical piece of what the board brings to the table. So having those members of the board who can help the organization reach into the community with those community connections, and even if it's somebody, in our case, from the immigrant community, it doesn't mean that they have to be able to walk into one of the corporate offices downtown, but are we able to make connections more deeply into our Hispanic community here in Alabama? All of those different connections are important to us. So there are many different ways that we have to think about looking at what is the composition of our board, what sorts of skills do we need to have around the table, and making sure that we are then supporting those board members as we bring them on board, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So when we're thinking about, now that we've got this board around the table and we're thinking about we have to begin the strategic planning process, and for us that happens about every 5 years. And we're about to be doing that for HICA in this coming year. It's always an interesting question to say, do we, we are the one as staff that are in the trenches and that are doing the work. How do we engage our board in that strategic planning process? And so as a senior leadership team, we get together and we talk together with our executive team. But I would like for you guys at this moment to take this little poll and let us know what you guys do in your organization. I think, Lisa, if we can bring that poll up, do you engage does the board of directors at your organization engage in your strategic planning and thinking? And we've got some board members on this, so it's going to be interesting to see what we come up with here. Are we about done? So it looks like we've got a good, healthy two-thirds of us that say, yes, we do engage our board in the strategic planning. And that is really, really important because it is the board that has to communicate this message and really has to buy into what the organization is doing. I think that there is really a delicate balance between how the board engages in the work of the organization and is able to translate that message to the broader community. We certainly don't want our board to be in a micromanagement position with the organization, and the staff is really informing the leadership about what direction the organization is going in terms of the programming work, and we need the support of that, of the board to do that strategic planning. So it's really, it's a very important combined process, but the board has got to be at that and behind that process 100%. So I'm glad to see that we've got a good, healthy group of folks whose board is engaged in that. Amy, we're going to bounce back to you.
Sure, thank you. So, step 2, getting ready to grow. So, Isabella's talked quite a bit about the importance of the strategic plan or having strategic direction. And for me, it comes down to a really key piece about everyone being on the same page as far as where you're going as an organization. And for those of you who are leadership staff, executive directors or directors of development, leadership staff within your organization, you know just how critical that is, right? So if you, for example, as executive director, have a very concrete theory of change and philosophy and programs that roll up into that, and you're talking about that, and your board is on a whole different level, right? It can cause many different problems, both from an administrative side of things, but also from fundraising, communications, marketing, branding. I mean, there's lots of potential conflicts there. So, for those of you who reported that your board does not engage in strategic planning, that would be one very concrete thing that I would bring back. There is a role for the board in strategic planning. Like I said, some of it's about getting on the same page, but it's also about, their part of their job or their responsibility as board members is to set the strategic direction in concert with the staff. Because, again, in theory, the board, or in reality, the board are community members from all walks of life. And so as nonprofits, right, our boards are our direct connection with community. And so the board has an intimate role in participating in setting out that strategic direction. What we do not mean by that is, for example, that the board micromanages or tells you how to operationalize that strategic direction or that strategic plan. So usually the board will be working on and approving a mission statement, for example, potentially very large, very lofty goals, organizational goals, right? But they would not be saying, for example, if you say you want to do prevention, one of your core principles is preventing violence, right? That would be appropriate for the board to sign off on and whatnot, but it's not appropriate then for them to say, okay, so prevention, we want you to do 3 after-school programs and 2 public media campaigns that reach out to young people. See what I'm saying? So that's more operationalized, right? That's the staff's job under the executive director. So number 2, what to do with inactive members. Again, when you're ready to grow a board. And when I say grow, I also mean deepen, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean bringing on a whole bunch of new members, right? But it's about deepening their engagement, deepening their value to the organization. So some of us know that our boards are not perfect, right? I don't think I've really been on a board or been on a staff with a board that's been perfect. But so oftentimes there are members that are inactive, right? And it could be for a lot of different reasons. So one strategy that I've used that's helpful for inactive members is to really reach out to them. As staff, it's even better if you could have, for example, a board, your board chair, or maybe someone from the nominations committee reach out to inactive members and ask them, what's going on. It could be just that they're in a hard crunch at work, right? So, maybe the month of April is really, really hard for them at work, but they'll be coming back. It could be that something's going on in their personal life. It could be maybe that they're overextended, whether that be with having, taking on a new job and they just don't have the time anymore. Or it could be that they, and we see this as well sometimes, unfortunately, some people make it kind of a career being on kind of the strategic boards in your community, so they might be on 5 boards at one time, right? And just physically and emotionally don't have the time to be able to really, truly engage with your board. So there's lots of reasons for members being inactive. And so, there's a couple of different strategies that you can take, right? For me, board members are volunteers, and it is about relationships, right? And so it's about getting inactive members either to recommit back to the mission, back to the organization, and commit to being active members, or to roll them off, right? Roll them off of the board. And an example of a way to roll them off would be, and this is really as well, I think about with the founder syndrome, number 3. One kind of concrete strategy that you could think about is developing like an emeritus board or an advisory board, right, which doesn't have monthly meetings or quarterly meetings, doesn't have any of the fiduciary responsibilities that a board of directors has, but they're people that still want to stay involved, stay engaged, maybe lend their voice or their name or their community standing to your organization. So it's to roll them off of being board members, but still having a position within your organization. So a place I used to work, we had an advisory, we called it an advisory board, and really it was for 2 reasons. Individuals in the community that didn't maybe have the time to be on a board, so it could be like a CEO of a local corporation, for example. They didn't have the time to be on our local board, but they wanted to lend their name to us, right? So that they would be a member of the advisory committee. Or for past board members who were inactive, or for founders who had been on the board, but now we wanted to roll off. And so this advisory board met once a year in person. We would, invite them for breakfast, and we would give them a report on, how the organization had been doing. We would present a couple of challenges to them as an organization to get their feedback, insight, direction. So again, it's a way of continuing to maintain those relationships, seeking their input, keeping them involved and engaged, but acknowledging that they just don't have the bandwidth to be, an active member of the board. So those would be some things that we wanted to highlight in that slide for getting ready to grow. Monica, step number 3, recruitment.
Okay, so hello everyone. So recruitment is going back to the assessment that Isabel already discussed. So it's tied in a way. So an effective board needs to have the right combination of members with expertise and skills needed to fulfill the governance responsibilities and also support the organization with its mission. So the recruitment of the new board members needs to be thoughtful and with a process, but not cumbersome, that it takes too long or discourages potential candidates. So every board member is required to be committed and participate actively. And other qualities that at least some board members need to have are, expertise in a key topic area, credibility and strong connections to key constituencies, knowledge and experience in fundraising, and also the ability to ask for money, and also possibilities of introducing to potential donors with resources. So before embarking on any recruitment, it is important to first determine which assets or skills are needed for missing from the current board, as Isabel mentioned earlier. So for this, it is helpful to analyze the composition of your board and making a list of skills, talents, and experiences that would be ideal to have, and then chart this, and also include, people who are in the board and then currently, and then what you would like to have, which may not be in the board already. And then, so please feel free to share briefly in the chat box your key strategies in recruiting board members. What has worked for you, briefly? And then, so some organizations may find it helpful to have a nominating or board development committee, and this is for larger organizations. And these committees can help with the development and developing the criteria, the chart, proposing potential board members, even though like everyone can help with identifying board members, as well as evaluating candidates, making the invitation, and also with the orientation. So as part of this selection process, it's also helpful to look out for candidates who may have more than one of the skills that you are looking for. So, 2 or 3 of the different skills that you're looking for. And also, before making the selection, it is important to have a meeting with the potential candidates and ask about their background and interests and explain exactly why you want them and the unique value that they will bring to the board, as well as the individual requirements of the board service. And these requirements are different from the general board responsibilities that will be reviewed later. So the requirements are different, may include number or frequency of board meetings, participation in meetings, review of materials and financial documents, make annual financial contribution, participate in fundraising, and serve as a resource or advisor on a specific topic. So once they agree and you assess that they would be a good fit, then you already can make the nomination or continue with the process or election for approval and share the bio with the whole board. So everyone can play a role in identifying a potential board member. So as a tool for identification, we can chart a circle for potential candidates, and then so this circle, and you can actually, we can do this as an exercise right now. So you may want to grab a piece of paper and draw 3 circles, one inside the other. And so this tool can be used to, for identifying potential board members, donors, potential partnerships. And so in the center, it would be, you would be in the center. And then in the second circle, you would have the individual donors, potential partnerships, potential board members, the closest to you. And that would like colleagues, friends, person from the faith community. And then the third circle, that would be people that are connected to you, but not so intimate, like friend of a friend, someone at a church or another organization that you don't really know very well. And then, so do you want to share? Let me see if anybody share any names or ideas for identifying or recruiting new members.
So
thank you for sharing.
This is Amy. I just wanted to mention a couple of things about the circle exercise. I've used this in the past, like Monica said, for example, when you're looking at how do you engage new individual donors into your organization. Really, the circle is a way for you to capture in a visual space the networks that you have that are very close to you and that are further away from you. So if you're on the nominating committee of the board, for example, you think about yourself personally, who am I connected to? Or colleagues that might want to be on this board, right? Or who, like Monica said, who are people from the faith community that I personally am connected to that might want to be on this board. And then the next thing is really still connections that you have to people, but they're less firm, right? They're less solid connections. So it could be a leader, the mayor in your local, in your community, right? That maybe goes to the same place of worship that you do, but you're not good friends with her or him, right? But if that's a person that you put on the outer ring. It's really for you to kind of amplify your perspective on who do you touch in a normal, in your normal daily work, personally and professionally. What are the relationships that you have that you might not even think of? Are you in a professional fundraising association, right? Or a women's auxiliary, or whatever those kinds of community groups and stuff. You're interacting with people, on a daily or near daily basis. Those are all potential board members that you could have.
And one of our participants has said that, the whole staff has come up with recommendations for people to participate on boards. This is Isabel. So, this is something that, we can talk to everybody in the organization about. It's not just something for senior leadership, but something that we should, in our own organization, we can ask everybody to help us together and think about who would be appropriate people to serve on the board.
Mm-hmm. And in the previous slide, I'm just going to go back a second, Monica, just to highlight here for people. When we said to develop a thoughtful but not cumbersome process, really that goes hand in hand with what Isabel is saying and Monica is saying, in that, if sometimes board members are recruited because someone will come up to you and say, oh my gosh, we're really struggling as an organization, and do you want to be on our board, right? And no one really wants to join a board, right, where they're asked that way. So that's like really where there's no process for recruiting. But you also don't want to create such a cumbersome process that it takes a year and a half to get a board member on, right? So what works best for you and your organization? Are you able to have a nominating committee so that staff can give names and other board members can give names to the committee so that they can vet that process? Is part of looking at your mission and your core values part of recruiting board members? So, if you're HICA, like, Isabel's organization, and you're serving the Latino community, the immigrant Latino community, you would want to see that your board members have understanding or at least an openness, right, to working with Latino communities, right, or immigrant communities. So how do you do some of that screening as part of your process for bringing your board members on?
Thank you, Amy and Isabel. So I think just wanted to share how we all became part of ASISTA. So I was invited to ASISTA's board many years ago. And then over the years, we needed new board members. So 2 years ago, we identified Amy as a potential board member. And so I recommended, but then Isabel was already part of technical assistance collaboration and with ASISTA separately. So the leadership or executive directors at ASISTA invited Isabel separately. And they identified Isabel, and we did interviews. We did, not interviews, but phone conversations. We gathered their bios, shared it with the board, got a feedback and approval. So we went through the whole process for this, nomination and recruitment. As we discussed, and of course we identified key skills in them that we were looking for, or that we were missing in the board at that time. And then one other area is that it's important. It is good to bring new board members, but not to bring 2 or 3, 4 maximum at a time, because there's time. They need time for onboarding, and this is what Isabel will speak about right now. So thank you.
Thanks, Monica. And you made a very important point. Depending upon the size of the board, at HICA, what we try to do is basically have our board change by a third every year. It doesn't always work that way, but you don't want to lose half your board at the end of 1 year because people have come to the end of their term. So that's something to think about in terms of, if you have a board of 15 members and you have term limits of 3 years, that, we try to have, we have more board members than that, but, if you can do like a third new, a third new, and a third new every 3 years, then you sort of don't take a big hit in any 1 year, and you keep some institutional knowledge. But in terms of what it means to onboard a board member, you have done the recruitment, you know what skills you need, you have vetted your person between having several board members meet them and you've met them as executive director. It's really important to take the time to do a thorough orientation. What we do at HECA is normally before our first board meeting of the year, we prepare a binder and we set aside about an hour or an hour and a half to have just a sit down with the board chair and some of the senior staff members to do an orientation about the history of the organization, talk about the different programs that we offer, because the board member is going to walk into a board meeting and start hearing, the financial information, start hearing about different programmatic work, and it's going to be a lot of information to have at one time. So it's really important to try and prepare this board member ahead of time about the organization. Sometimes you're lucky and you have a volunteer that has been working with the organization for a while, but otherwise you get board members that, and I'll just be really honest, board members will come up to me after they've been on the board for a year and a half and say, my whole first year, I really didn't know anything that was going on. And that's really my fault as the executive director, because I should have done a better job at orienting that board member. Somewhere along the way, I didn't do something right. And so, we have to always strive to do better. In that orientation, it's really, really important to talk about what the expectations are. And the board chair leads this, and so, to talk about the commitment to come to the meetings, the commitment to make that individual gift, the commitment to help the executive director gain other resources by going on fundraising meetings and helping solicit other gifts is really, really important. One of the things that we have seen happen over the years at our organization that has been really awesome is when board members form relationships between themselves outside of just the HECA board meetings. And so those independent relationships sort of, making, not really forcing the board buddies, but that just has sort of evolved naturally. But it also does help when you can pair a more seasoned board member with an oncoming, a new onboarded board member to sort of show them the ropes. It really makes it a lot easier for them in that process. We always sort of list out what our expectations are. Like I mentioned, the whole giving and the fundraising. That is never an easy subject to talk about. It just isn't. But it's a necessary subject to talk about. For us, in our community, grant applications are getting more and more rigorous about just flat out asking, does 100% of your board support your work? And that's the conversation that we have with our board at every meeting. In every meeting, we have that conversation. And so it's just the right thing to do to be very clear up front with our board about that in the process. As I mentioned before, for some people who are coming to serve on your board, if in our case maybe you work with a community that doesn't have experience being on a board of directors, it's important to provide some just basic how to be a board member 101. And so that becomes also part of that onboarding process that we can't overlook if we really want to have an organization that is practicing best practices in the field. Like I said before, the passion is so, so important, but we also need to have board members who really know what it means to be a board member, that we have the fiscal responsibility for the organization, that we need to contribute financially to the organization, and that this is serious business. It's not just only because of passion. Amy, that gets into building connections.
Yeah, well, exactly. One thing I wanted to say, Isabel, if I could, about fundraising, and I see a question just popped up about suggestions for how much board members should give.
That's always a big question.
It is. I think one of the things that I would suggest as a tool or a framework for you all to think about this is, there are some organizations that you will see that there's a minimum requirement, right? And other organizations don't have that. So the way in which I think about it, we do a Break the Cycle. When I came on, we did have a minimum requirement for board members to give, right? And so again, for those of you on the webinar who participated in the SOS Institute that Futures presents, you know that all we talk about is mission, 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 and how your mission drives your organizational development, right? And so when I think about like the mission at Break the Cycle is around inspiring young people, right? So we're an organization that serves young people. And if I look at our board, and we have a minimum board level of, in our case, it was $2,500. Now there are young people that have lots of money, right? But that would be limiting to getting different kinds of young people involved in our board. And so the board really then engaged in a conversation about what they wanted to do, right? So I'm not trying to tell you to have a minimum or not, but it is about what's your mission and how do we ensure that the board represents that from a funding perspective. So it is important, like Isabel said, that we have 100% giving. And so what we do at Break the Cycle is that the board has committed to each person doing an individual contribution to the organization and at a level that is significant to them, right?
Exactly, a personally significant gift.
Personally significant gift. And from my perspective, that opens it up so that you can get people who don't have as much money to be on your board and value their contributions. But it also opens it up to those individuals maybe that have lots of money. So if your minimum gift is $2,500, for example, and you have someone that has the capacity to give $25,000, right? They're still only going to give $2,500 because that's what everybody's giving. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you switch so that it's what's a meaningful gift to them, you can get donations all over the board. So that's something to think about for those of you who are board members on webinar. It's a kind of a different framework than just having a minimum gift.
That's a very good point, Amy. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I know when I get a gift, a monthly recurring gift from a community member of $15, that is a personally significant gift.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Okay, building connections. So we wanted to highlight a couple of different things. Here's what this is. The first point, the next two slides are specifically about this first point of board and staff relationship and responsibility. So I'll go into that in the next two slides. Community relationships. So I think one other kind of concrete tool is ensuring that your board members have very large representation from all different community relationships that you think are important. So it could be relationships with funder communities, so that could be corporations, family foundations, for example, community foundations in your local area. But it could also be in partner organizations that you have, right? So if you have a strategic relationship with, I'm trying to think, if you're a domestic violence shelter, for example, and you have a strategic relationship with an employment organization, nonprofit, right? You might want to have someone from either that organization on your board or someone who is an expert in employment on your board, right? It really depends upon where is your community emphasis and ensuring that representation on your board. Another way in building connections is really having the board members have the tools that they need to be able to talk to others in your community. So when I say talking to constituency,
I think, Amy, your mic has gone out. Sorry, everyone. Hang tight. Amy, are you still there? Isabel, Monica, can you say anything while we wait for Amy to hop back on?
Sure. Let's see. So Amy was talking about, let me just get, so, you know, the reality is that the board members aren't going to be as steeped in the work as we are as executive directors. Board members, you know that's the truth. So we have got to arm you with the tools that you need to talk to the constituencies that we need to help support our work. So it's important for us to give you those elevator speeches, those snippets of you know, just the 3-minute, the 30-second speech that you can use to talk to the people that we need you to speak to. So one of the things that we do here at HECA is we actually have several little trainings that we give our board members to help them know how to message the work that we do. This morning I went to visit a bank president with 2 of my board members, and my board members did a very good job of saying exactly what they needed to say because they have been through the messaging training. And that is exactly the right way that we get them on the same page, because it's difficult for them to know the ins and the outs. But when we have those trainings, it really helps to support them. And then when we think about how to stay connected with our board members in between meetings, our board meets on every other month. Some boards only meet quarterly. It's difficult when a board meets quarterly for the board to really know what's going on in between the time, because so much happens on a daily basis in a nonprofit organization. It's really, really helpful for the board to get, you know, a monthly update. Probably a weekly update is a little bit too much for the board. The executive director and the board chair probably are in a lot more communication, but board briefings are really, really, really important to keep the board up to date, because that board member is going to be out in the community, is going to run into funders, and it's really important for the board member to know what's going on with the organization. So when a funder says, oh, well, we just gave your organization money to do a project, how's that project going? We want the board member to be able to say, you know, I just read that board briefing and I know what's going on in this program. So those are really, really important tools to keep people going on the same page. Am I?
Isabel, this is Amy. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, I'm so sorry to everyone. I'm not sure I could hear. I could hear Lisa saying, we can't hear you, so I'm not sure what happened, but I am back and just wanted to let you know that I'm here. Were you able to do step 5, or is there any other pieces that I needed to run over?
I didn't really get to the committees part.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other, thank you. The final piece on the building connections. Oftentimes, traditionally, boards have The committee structures have been made up of committee or board members only, right? And so one thing to think about as a tool is to bring in volunteers that are not on your board to form part of your committee. So for example, in your finance committee, you could have your treasurer, obviously, from your board, maybe another board member, but then maybe have someone from your local bank. Maybe have someone from the local PTA who's in charge of the treasurer for the local PTA. People who have finance background, maybe it's a financial investor or financial advisor, right, for a personal financial advisor. People who have financial backgrounds but that are not on your board. Same thing with the fundraising committee, with the HR, with an HR committee or like a development committee. It's a great way. So first of all, you get different perspectives, right, from different people in your community. You're building community buy-in to your organization. It's also a really great way to screen for new board members. So, if you have a committee member that's a volunteer, they're very active, they might then be someone who you then would want to consider in the future bringing on the board. It's good for succession planning. So if you have a treasurer that's been on your board for 4 or 5 years, right, having another committee member who now knows the finances, knows the way the organization is run, et cetera, then could be ready and willing and trained and able then to come into the treasurer position. So it's a way that I know some organizations do their committee work and others don't. So it's something that we wanted you all to consider. So I'm going to move on now to the next 2 slides, which really look at point number 1, which is board-staff relationship and responsibilities. We thought it might be helpful to very quickly go over the responsibilities of boards for those of you who are board members on the phone, but also, again, for executives and program staff as well. So I'm just going to read through these quickly. The responsibilities are, again, like we said, to determine the mission and the purpose of the organization, to select the executive, the chief executive, usually executive director of the organization, and to support and evaluate that person, right? So if you have your board members, for example, wanting to do performance reviews for your advocates or your frontline staff, even your middle management, that's inappropriate. Their job and their responsibility is to evaluate the head person, the executive director. High-level effective planning, which again builds into the strategic direction or strategic planning process. Support and strengthen programs and services, so that could be through volunteers that they may know, or for example, if you have the need in one of your programs to develop and print a really great new curriculum that you're doing in the school, the board member might know the owner of a local print shop, and they can get the printing donated in kind, right? So that's how, when we say programs and services, it's not about the board members doing the programs or providing the services, but it's about them using their own networks and their own influence to support the work of the staff to do the programs and the services. The next slide goes without saying, ensuring adequate financial resources. The way in which I think about that piece specifically as the executive director is, my job really is to have the board have the tools they need to be able to go out and help us get the financial resources. So do they know what's going on in the organization? Can they do their elevator speech and talk about the impact of our organization? Do they have a personal story that they can share? Right? What are the tools that they need to be able to go out and ask people for money? If there are board members, because there always are, if there are board members that don't feel comfortable asking for resources, right, how do you then as a staff, as the lead, maybe go with them, right, so they can talk about why they're involved in your organization, and then you make the ask, be it pairing that board member who's uncomfortable with fundraising or making a specific ask, pairing them up with another board member who loves to do that. So those are all examples of what you can do. Protect assets and provide financial oversight, right? That's a key component, reviewing financials on a regular basis, asking questions about how, ensuring that there are financial policies. All of those pieces are critical. Building a competent board that's both grounded in the realities of your community and your mission and your vision, but also has the kinds of oversight. So, for example, essential positions really truly are someone who has a finance background and hopefully someone with a nonprofit finance background, right? A lawyer is always a great person, having legal skills and mindset. HR, some key kind of, skills that you need, for me, all roll up into the competent board. Ensuring legal and ethical integrity, that kind of goes without saying. And then enhancing the organization's public standing, which also kind of goes without saying. So those are the 10 very basic responsibilities of nonprofit boards.
Thanks, Amy. Now to getting on the same page. Each year, it's important to sort of look at what's the scope of the work that's coming up. What did we do last year? What do we want to do this year? How does your board plan for the year? I sort of touched on some of this when, Amy, when you disappeared, I jumped in and touched on some, and I got ahead of myself a little bit here in talking about board briefings and board learning. But, we've got to keep our board informed, so we've got to think about how we are going to, look forward to each coming year. Some boards do work plans. Amy, do you want to talk about those work plans?
Sure. One thing for you all to consider is that I assume that many of you do work plans from an operations side, right? So many programs will do work plans. What's the scope of work? What do you want to accomplish in your programs? What are your benchmarks and objectives? All the things that we have to do, number one, for funding, but also to ensure the quality of the programming that we're doing. One thing to consider is to do a similar thing for the board, that the board, you as the executive, support your board to do their own work plan. And a couple ways you can think about it is either by doing it in the committee. So, the finance committee has a work plan, and the fund development or fundraising committee has a work plan. The nominations committee has a work plan. And if that's too detailed, maybe it's just one general work plan for the board. And it's really thinking about, what do you want to accomplish as a board for the year? And so if there are big things, for example, like strategic planning, if you know that's something that you want to do, how do you build that accountability in a work plan? If it's that you, as a staff, you know that you want to increase your individual donors, for example, how do you take that goal and then have that on the board's work plan as well? And then they can say, well, one of our goals is, increasing our individual donors. We're going to have 5 or 3 or 1, dinner that a board member hosts with new potential individual donors for the organization, right? So it's really about them thinking about their responsibilities and then creating a work plan which can help them hold themselves accountable, because we all as staff know that, as staff, we don't hold the board accountable, right? The board has to hold themselves accountable. And so a work plan is an easy strategy to use so that everyone's on the page. The board members can create it together, and so they agree on it, and then it can be used as a tool to hold each other accountable as the year progresses.
Thank you so much. Getting down to step 7, institutionalizing the mission. And I just want to point out that when we talk about fundraising expectations, we've talked about that some, and I think most everybody on the call is probably an OVW grantee. We aren't doing any fundraising with our OVW funds. We're doing fundraising with our unrestricted funds because OVW funds don't go for that. But, we've got to make sure that we are keeping our fundraising expectations focused on the mission. When when we set our sights on the mission and the work that we're going to do, we have got to stay focused on that. It is oftentimes easy to, get pulled in different directions, but we've got to stay focused on the reason that the organization exists and, stay focused on that work. It is certainly easy for us to get pulled in different directions when a pot of money gets dropped in our lap or the prospect of a pot of money, but it's really important that if we are going to begin to shift our focus, that we look at, is this the right thing to do? Does it make sense? Is the community growing in such a way that it makes sense for us as a whole organization to do this? And how do we, come together back, with the board to get on the same page and look at, is this the right thing for us to do? But talk about this with the board. In terms of think about succession planning, when we talked earlier about term limits and that sort of thing, it's really important that we continue to look at how we are building a leadership bench in our board of directors. It's fairly common for boards to have 2 3-year terms for board members. Some boards will allow the leadership, say the chair, to serve extra time once they have moved into their position. That's not always the case, but it's really important that we are looking at how we are building the leadership bench, because all too often people get pulled onto boards, and because they are, 1, passionate, and 2, maybe they have a good relationship with the executive director, get put into positions of leadership maybe before they are really ready to do that in an organization. And that's not always the best thing for the organization. It takes time to build the depth of knowledge that is important for board members to have to be the most effective board members that they can. As I mentioned earlier, when you can stagger term limits and always be thinking about, who do I have in the wings to come on next? Say, for instance, you have a good relationship with the corporation in your town. Don't just be thinking about the person who is on your board now from that corporation, but be in conversation with that person and say, well, who behind you in this corporation would be another person, that could follow behind you on the board, and be getting to know that person. Have that person be getting to know the organization, because it's really, really important to have that continuity. I mean, it's from a fundraising standpoint. We want to keep that relationship with the company, but we also want to keep that relationship we want to begin building that relationship with the person, because it's critical. It's very disruptive. For those of you organizations that are small who are on the call, we depend upon our board members. As executive directors, you know that there are not a lot of places that we can turn for advice, and so our board members become really, really important to us. And so having a good board that supports us is really, really important. Having term limits, we've talked, and I know there's a question that we will get to in just a little bit about the founders syndrome. All of us presenters, I think, would agree that having term limits is really, really important. It's just best practices, and sometimes it's very difficult for people who are founding board members to leave, but as Amy said, there are ways that they can still remain involved, but it is not really to the ultimate health of the organization to have long-term founding board members remain in an active role in the organization. You need, for the health of an organization, to have those term limits. And pretty much standard is 2 3-year terms. I know we're running out of time, and we want to get to best practices, to questions. Amy, do you want to wrap it up with the
Sure.
final board meeting tips?
Mm-hmm. So the board meeting tips, obviously, with the expectations and the responsibilities of the board to approve, for example, your annual budget, to do a review of the executive, to approve the audit, all of those things are our responsibilities. One other thing to kind of engage the board is around a board learning. So how do you incorporate a new topic? For example, if you're going to start doing a new program on trafficking, for example, how do you get the board to come up to speed, not on the ins and outs of how do you provide services to victims of trafficking, but to understand what trafficking is, right? Like are there trafficking victims in your community? How did you decide to make this program decision to start doing trafficking work? What are some of the common myths that we have about trafficking victims? It's for the board to have an understanding, even if it's basic, right, of some of the issues that are going on in your community. You could also do a board learning that's separate from, kind of content and more around for their responsibility. So, for example, if your board is saying that they don't really understand how to read financials, right? You could do a board learning on, you have your treasurer do a board learning for the members on how to read financials. So it really, again, kind of depends upon where your organization is at. But that learning component makes the meetings less dry, less boring, right? And everyone then is continuing to learn as the organization progresses. As far as the committees go, again, the essential piece of a lot of the work can get done, especially if you're meeting quarterly. A lot of the work can be done in committee, which can be very helpful. So committees, especially if you bring in volunteers outside of the board, like we talked about earlier, they can be a really great support for staff, right, to bring in new expertise, new connections, ideas, right, critical thinking. Or if there's an area where you don't have a lot of staff expertise, for example, in social media or marketing, right, a committee, an ad hoc committee or just a regular committee could be a really great support for the staff, for your mission, and a way to keep board members engaged and involved. So I think from this, I did want to say that this last slide here are just a few examples that we have from a toolkit. So governance practices, which we didn't talk in specific detail about all of the governance issues, right? But there's some tips for you there. A contract, for example, different things that the board member needs to know around fundraising. So those are some examples for you. And we wanted to open it up now for questions from all of you. Lisa, do you have questions that have come through?
Yeah, so I have a lot of good questions. Isabel, you mentioned, or Isabel and Amy, you expanded upon this a little bit, but just to ask it one more time, can you say more about the founder syndrome and what to do to prevent or intervene when it occurs? I know you mentioned term limits and whatnot, but any other tips? And if you could explain it a little more.
Sure. So the founder syndrome, when you look at most nonprofits in general, and definitely within the space that we all work, which, in the areas of domestic violence or stalking, dating violence, sexual violence, trafficking, all those issues, usually the organizations are founded by somebody, an individual or a group of individuals, a collective, who are very passionate. Right? They see a need in the community and they found an organization, right? That's traditionally how it goes. And those are usually visionary individuals. They're people who have tons of passion, right? And over the years, that's really great what you need as a startup, right? When you need those people involved as they're usually volunteers because, right, they're starting an organization, there's no funding, right? So they're volunteers. And so oftentimes founders then, or the founder, will move into the board of directors role once you're at a place in your organizational history of being able to hire staff, right? But what happens and what we call founder syndrome is really when the organization is at such a place that maybe they're going in new directions that the founder didn't that the founder didn't anticipate, or maybe the paid staff have a different style of leadership or style of working in community, different than the founder. Or the new staff members want to run the quote-unquote business differently. So maybe they want to create a hierarchical structure, right, where the founder wanted it to be more of a collective structure. I mean, there could be lots of differences in the way in which the founder's vision for the organization is different than the staff. And so when you're at that, and especially if the founder is still on the board, and this happens quite often actually, there can be lots of conflict between the staff and the board, especially the founder of the organization. And so when it comes to a situation where it's very difficult, right, it's starting to get in the way of the success of the organization, I think it is about the board and staff leader coming together and being able to have a very honest conversation about this. And, valuing and verbalizing that value to the entire board of the founder, and because you're all there because the founder had this idea, but that maybe it would be time for the founder. And again, this has to come from the board. If the founder is a board member, this cannot be the executive recommending this. This has to be the board recommending this. Maybe it's time then for the founder to found, right, an emeritus board, for example, or an advisory board for the organization. So it allows them to, it allows you as an organization to be able to value the contributions of the founder, and at the same time understand that the organization has evolved into such a place really that the founder now has a different kind of role, which could, for example, be in an advisory capacity or whatnot. So the relationship is critical. You don't want to end that relationship unless obviously it's very unhealthy, which most of the cases it isn't. It usually just is a different philosophy from the founding principles to where the organization has come. So I'm not sure if hopefully that answered your question.
Okay, great. Next question. This is a short one. Should the board gifts be kept confidential?
Yes, that does not need to be shared with anyone except the board. Maybe the executive director knows, but the finance person or the development director. Board members don't need to know what each other gives, and it doesn't need to be shared. Yeah, it should be private.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So this question comes from Tamar asking, my organization is comprised of partners like hospitals, state agencies, etc., that pay partner dues, and the board members are representatives of those entities. So in other words, it isn't completely voluntary. Some people are there because, they have to be there. While everybody shares a passion for the mission, some are more enthusiastic about it than others. So we have one board member that, donated a large sum of money, but then some don't contribute anything at all. And to keep their organization as a funding partner, you must have a seat for them on the board. So the question is, what is your advice when it comes to having assigned board members that represent a partner agency, and it's 100% voluntary board? And I think this could be a question that is applicable to even voluntary board members who just aren't very engaged anymore. So any tips on how to deal with that?
I think this is Amy. I think starting out when you are recruiting board members, I think that even if I understand this, of having a partner organization, right, having a chair on your board, but I think having this expectation up front and stating that to people is really important. So one of the responsibilities, one of the expectations that we have if you're going to come on to our board is that you make a personal financial contribution. And really, for me, the bottom line is, and Isabel referenced this earlier when she was talking about this point, funders are more and more asking. I do get this question as the executive. What percentage of your board members give? And so when you have to be able to say 100%, and that's very basic. I mean, why would you ask someone else, whether it be a community foundation or a corporate foundation, to support your organization when the leaders of your organization aren't supporting it, right? And so putting that expectation out there right away when you're recruiting people usually helps. Now, it doesn't help if you're in the current situation, right, of having, half of the people giving or whatnot. So in this case specifically, I would bring it and have it be a large conversation at a board meeting, and you being able to express the importance of why you need them to give. The other thing, when we talked about earlier about not having a minimum gift, because really, it's something that's meaningful to the person. And so a meaningful gift to a person who works at another nonprofit, for example, that doesn't make, a huge salary, a meaningful gift could be $25, right? So we're not talking about hundreds or thousands of dollars here. It's really about everyone contributing something to the organization. And it really, funders are asking, and it really is important.
Great. Another question. What is your advice when the board states that they don't want the agency to focus on a certain population, such as human trafficking survivors?
So I can, Isabel, do you want to respond, or do you want me to respond and you add to it, or?
Well, I was going to say, not knowing a lot of the context about what the organization serves already, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, but that would be a big conversation, I guess, to have with the board to sort of discern, what's going on there. Is there a need in the community for that service? Is there not, what's the bigger picture of the community? Is it a board? Is it a specific board member? Yeah, Amy, please jump in.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things come to my mind right away. If your mission, again, it's always helpful to go back to your mission. If your mission is about ending violence within your local community, and your local community has human trafficking victims in it, right, it's a mission question. You have to be able to serve human trafficking victims because they are part of your community, if, again, that's your mission. The other piece, so really starting out with what your mission says, and if this falls into it, which it should, I can't really see how it wouldn't, there's really no question. The other piece is programming. The way that I see it, programming is operations. It's what I was saying earlier about the strategic plan, right? And the board can giving you setting strategic direction, but then you are doing programming. You as staff are implementing the programming. So doing a new program focused on a new population, such as human trafficking victims, is an operations decision, right? And so that would be another way that I would enter into the conversation, right? This is a program operations decision. It falls within our mission. We have the funding to do this. So you're making the argument, all the reasons why it makes sense. So those would be a couple of ways that I would talk about it, I think, with the board.
Yep.
And this is Monica. And in terms of the topic of human trafficking, especially for domestic violence and sexual assault organizations, it's important to also highlight the intersection because some organizations don't want to focus because of a different topic, but there is an intersection. So that's another story. And then there's some other areas, for example, LGBT organizations wanting to focus on DV, others wanting to do more outreach and or focusing on community outreach and prevention, so changing the focus. So that's conversations to have during strategic planning meetings as well.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right, so I think we have time for one or two more. Here's one question from Maria Jose. Hi, good to have you on, Maria Jose. Should the executive directors be members? We have seen that in other organizations. What is the benefit? Is there any?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yes.
This is
Go ahead,
Isabel.
Isabel.
I'm a member of my board. I'm a non-voting member, but I'm a member. And I think that it is important just to be there. Yes.
And this is Amy, so I am not a member of my board, so this is actually good because you're getting both sides, right, perspective. So the way in which at Break the Cycle that we do it, I am at all of the meetings, and actually my senior staff I have at all of the board meetings as well. But we are not voting members, and we're not considered members of the board either. Really, our job is there as staff to report to the board, to answer questions, to support them in any thinking that they're doing or whatnot. But we are not. I'm not a member of the board. And again, I don't think there really is a best practice. There's lots of good arguments for the executive being a member, and there's also lots of good arguments for the executives to not be a member of the board. So I think it goes back to, again, what's the reasoning for it, right? What are you trying to accomplish as an executive, raising that issue to the board chair? How, for example, at Break the Cycle, the board can go into what they call executive session, which is a time that they have conversations without me. Sometimes executive session could be a conversation that they have with me there, and then I leave. So, for example, if they're talking about my performance review, for example, they would go into executive session where they're not taking the board meeting minutes. We have a conversation about my performance review, and then I would step out of the meeting, and the board would continue to have a conversation without me being present. So that's an example of when you're an executive director and you are not a member of the board. But again, there really is different ways to do it.
And we do a similar. We always have an executive session, and I am present. And no other staff is, but if it's around my evaluation and that sort of thing, I leave the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we have a question from actually one of our faculty members that's here with us today, Aparna. Her question is, does board giving include supporting events, sponsoring, etc.? It's a debate that she's encountered recently. So board members, they support events, but that's classified under event revenue and may not reflect in budgets as board giving. So what's your take on that?
Board members should support the events, and board members should make a gift to an annual fund. Board members, unfortunately, get hit up every time there's an opportunity to hit up a board member.
That's why I'm laughing, because I say both.
Yeah.
They do need to make an annual contribution, and then hopefully they're also able to buy a table at a fundraising event or sell 10 tickets, or do you know what I'm saying? Like, they have multiple reasons to bring in money to the organization, but it's not one or the other.
It's all.
Mm-hmm.
It's all.
Great. And one more that I saw, can you say anything about board evaluations, self-evaluations or whatnot?
So this is Amy. One of the things that we do at Break the Cycle when we're starting the fiscal year, we sit down with the board and we ask them kind of what their goal, each individual board member, what their goals are for the year, what they want to accomplish, whether it be fundraising or other things. And then when the year is towards the end of the year, then we go back and we sit down with them and see if they've accomplished their individual goals, but then also what are they thinking about for the future. So That's about as much evaluation as we do at our organization. I think there is value in it.
There is a lot of value in it, and it's another tool to keep board members engaged.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Great. So I think we're going to wrap things up now. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please remember to fill out our evaluation, which should pop up on your screen when you exit the meeting. You can also access it by clicking on the link below. Your feedback is very important to us, and I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our fantastic speakers. The file is available for download. The PowerPoint slide, it's available for download in the lower right-hand corner in the box titled Files 2. We'll send an email out to everyone with the link to this entire recorded session. It'll have the closed captioning. It'll have the chat function. It will have audio. So please feel free to share this with your colleagues and your board members. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.